Imagine walking into a vast mansion where everything shines with luxury, chandeliers glimmering like falling stars, and yet in the corner of that massive house, hidden behind closed curtains, someone is sitting in the dark with only a single flickering candle. That contrast alone would pull anyone's curiosity. But what if I told you that the person sitting there wasn't the millionaire owner of the mansion, but a cleaner? Someone who had been wiping floors and scrubbing toilets just hours before, now hunched over torn textbooks, eyes filled with determination. The story begins with a wealthy man named Richard, who had built his empire from nothing but had grown detached from the struggles of ordinary people. His life was wrapped in routine, morning meetings, business lunches, and late-night banquets, until one night when he decided to walk through a part of his mansion he rarely visited. Richard had returned home earlier than expected from a charity gala, the irony being that he was donating millions for education abroad while being unaware of what was happening under his very roof. As he walked through the corridor, he heard a faint sound, a whisper of pages turning, the scratch of a pencil, and a sigh so heavy that it could only belong to someone carrying the weight of dreams far bigger than their reality. Intrigued, he pushed open the door, expecting to find maybe a servant sleeping or someone misusing his space. Instead, his eyes landed on Amina, the cleaner he had barely ever noticed, sitting on the floor with her legs crossed, books spread around her like scattered treasures. The single bulb overhead didn't work. Only a half-burnt candle illuminated her weary but determined face. She was so absorbed in memorizing complex notes that she didn't even notice him standing there. For the first time in years, Richard froze, not because of anger, but because of an odd sense of respect mixed with disbelief. What was she doing here, in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? And more importantly, why in the dark? That was the hook that dragged him in, and unknowingly, it was the beginning of a chain of events that would transform not only Amina's life, but his own perception of privilege, determination, and humanity. Richard stood silently for a while, leaning against the doorframe, his mind swirling with 1,000 questions. Who was this young woman? Why was she hiding here in the dimmest corner of his estate instead of resting after a long day of exhausting labor? The more he watched, the more details struck him. The worn-out shoes at her side, the calloused hands that gripped the pen with such intensity, and the way her lips moved slightly as she whispered formulas to herself. This wasn't mere studying. This was survival. For a man who had always assumed that wealth was the ultimate currency of power, Richard found himself shaken. He remembered faintly that the household staff had mentioned Amina was from a poor neighborhood across town, a place where even electricity sometimes flickered out for days. He had never cared to ask more. Yet here she was, stealing knowledge, in the dark as though it were forbidden treasure. Finally, unable to restrain his curiosity, he cleared his throat. The sudden sound startled Amina so much that her pencil rolled across the floor. She jumped up, her eyes wide with fear, stammering apologies, expecting that her job was about to be ripped away. Richard, however, didn't shout. Instead, he asked softly, "Why here? Why in the dark?" She hesitated, her voice trembling, but eventually the words spilled out. She explained that after finishing her cleaning shifts, she had no quiet place at home. Her family's one-room house was crowded with siblings, noise, and endless chores. She came here, in the quiet mansion she cleaned daily, to chase the dream of passing her exams and becoming a nurse. The candle was her only light because she couldn't afford to waste electricity at home, nor could she risk being scolded by her exhausted parents who thought studying after work was pointless. Richard listened, and for once, he didn't think about business deals or numbers. He thought about his own childhood, the struggles his mother once endured, and the way he had clawed his way up. The sight of this girl reminded him of the grit he had lost in the cushion of luxury. Something stirred inside him. Instead of anger, there was admiration, but admiration wasn't enough. He felt compelled to act. He asked her to sit again, to show him what she was studying, and as she nervously obeyed, Richard knelt down beside her. For the first time in decades, the billionaire found himself helping someone solve equations under the flicker of a candle. The absurdity of it hit him, his $1 million chandelier above them, useless because no one had turned it on, while the light of one candle was enough to ignite something far greater than wealth, the courage of a young woman to defy her circumstances. Wordlessly, Richard made a decision that night. He wasn't just going to let her study in secret anymore. He was going to make sure the world saw the brilliance hidden in the girl the world ignored. He didn't tell her right away, but inside, he knew his life had just been redirected. The next morning, Amina thought the strange midnight encounter with her employer would simply fade into silence. She expected to be scolded, maybe even dismissed, but nothing prepared her for what was waiting. When she arrived at the mansion to start her shift, she found Richard already sitting in the grand hall with a stack of books, a new laptop, and a bright desk lamp on the table. For a moment she froze at the doorway, thinking she had mistakenly walked into someone else's study. Richard gestured her over, his stern face softened by something she had never seen before, genuine kindness. "From now on," he said firmly, "you will never study in the dark again." At first, Amina didn't understand. She blinked, still holding her mop, unsure if this was a trick. But then he explained. He had spoken to his staff and arranged a separate study room for her inside the mansion, fully equipped with everything she could possibly need: proper lighting, fresh notebooks, online resources, and even a private tutor he had hired to guide her. Amina's heart pounded, tears rushing into her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone with power wasn't mocking her dreams or brushing them aside as foolish fantasies. Richard didn't stop there. Quietly, he arranged to cover her tuition fees, transportation, and even created a flexible work schedule so she could focus on her studies without losing her income. At first, Amina resisted. Pride told her she didn't want to be a charity case, but Richard looked her straight in the eye and said, "This is not charity. This is an investment. Someday, you will save lives, and when you do, remember this moment." Those words carved themselves into her soul. Months passed, and under the glow of bright lamps instead of a dying candle, Amina's grades soared. She passed her exams with distinction, shocking her teachers, her family, and herself. The girl who once studied in the dark corners of a mansion was now walking into a university with her head held high. The day she received her acceptance letter, she rushed to Richard, unable to contain her joy. He didn't say much, just a proud nod, the kind a father gives when he sees his child's wings finally spreading. Years later, when Amina stood in her crisp white nurse's uniform, saving lives in a busy hospital, she often thought back to that night in the dark. What surprised everyone most wasn't just her success. It was the fact that a billionaire who could have ignored her entirely chose instead to light her path. That single act of compassion didn't just change Amina's destiny, it softened Richard's heart too. He began funding scholarships, building libraries in poor neighborhoods, and dedicating his wealth to creating opportunities for others who were silently burning their candles in the dark. And so, the story that began with a millionaire catching his cleaner studying in the shadows ended with two lives transformed, one who gained the light to rise and one who rediscovered the humanity hidden beneath the layers of wealth. It was a reminder to everyone who heard it. Sometimes the greatest wealth is not measured in money, but in the chances we give others to shine.